Stillborn to Life, a novella by Valerie Stevens. Chapter 18. The heart always bleeds, while the modern-day mind knows not. We must die, that we may live. And why do we ask questions for which we already have the answers? And truly, those answers most sought would prove to be antecedent to the only questions worth asking. My dreams were steeped in prophetic doom. I rose from them, doused in pensive lucidity, to beach the ghost shores of shame and nameless, endless indignation. And only now was I beginning to truly fear the wrath of others' potential wrathful reciprocity. I knew that I must change or perish, for the armor had become too conspicuous, too heavy to bear. And truly, we are always the death of ourselves, forgetting all too easily and eagerly how to instead garner our courage and true strength from the nurturing but ironclad hands of reverent virtue and heart tenderness. But had I the courage to be soft and malleable in a world so quick to turn cruel at the slightest gesture of self-preservation, no matter how it is expressed? For when everyone bears sword and shield, this act becomes perceived as an act of defiance, a death wish, the stoicism of jesters and fools. For it seemed to be now that the only way to truly survive was to turn the other cheek, and I most definitely was not conditioned to this. Yet I knew that I must begin placing my faith in the saving graces of discretion and humility. Now, forgetting the self would become the basic tenet of and my means to the end of saving myself. For my former philosophy of unbridled mortal expression and puristic naturalism in the name of breaching freedom and transcendence now seemed the stuff of idiocy and delusion. For it had truly served the means only to the end of creating within my essence an inmost core of rabid toxicity and self-estrangement. Yet, in the Herculean grip of loss, alienation, and profound grief, had I still the resolve and will to kill this sickly beast? Had I the strength to stand apart with purity of heart? Just how far had I slipped? Was it enough by now that I would never completely sever ties with irreconcilable rage and disgust? Would I settle for the cathartic yet disastrous camaraderie of hatred and fear? Or would I manage somehow to return, a prodigal orphan of the hell I had bore, to the arms of my beloved heavenly blood-father, to be loved again as the simple child that I had always been in his omniscient, redeeming eyes? All I knew was that I had to die to all that had come before this one moment, in every moment from henceforth. How that could be achieved, I did not know, and yet I knew that I had to try. Thus did my prayer to my God become, O Heavenly Father, if you can bear any more kin, I wish to be born again. As I reflect upon my past now, I recall how I used to believe in the devil far more than that of a holy, benevolent God. Yet such a phenomenon is rather pervasive when the sentient organs of the mortal human experience, by truth's indiscriminate ecclesiastical hand, are dealt enough blows of the profane, yet without first recognition of tragedy, even comedy turns tragic, and there is no imminent cause for redeeming ourselves. But perhaps we do not need tragedy of any kind. Perhaps the only true tragedies are those we invent merely to lend ourselves credibility and our existences some sense of meaning, purpose. Yes, perhaps this is the one and the only tragedy. And it arises out of the absurdest convictions we cling to in order to create something out of what is truly nothing, thereby heedlessly and needlessly enhancing and prolonging our own suffering. But how now, once the acknowledgement has been made after years of this tenacious gripping, could I let go, to let it all go, so that I could hold on? For the very act of surrender required an inscience of self-sense, which I did not think that I possessed, and which I knew, therefore, would not be in my best interest to attempt at this point, especially being one of those of my kind. Yet I often wondered if time had to be so short in life, so consumed by the juggling act of all paradox and duality, then perhaps man did indeed merely invent religion in all of its gods, demigods, devils, demons, saints, and angels to better aid his ontological dexterity. And many before me had concluded that perhaps the struggle itself was the meaning of human existence. But to what ends? You see, this question never ceases to follow. For no matter how craftily I attempted to attribute a factor of nihility to my life, I still felt a pull towards something which I sensed to be far from arbitrary or self-serving. It could be described as an instinctual, unceasing longing for creation over destruction, or as a faint murmur of possibility from deep within the heart. But whatever I chose to call this intangible but very powerful force, it did not need me to validate it. On the contrary, I intuited that it was inherently imbued with its own aseity. This higher sense and wisdom was as real to me as my very own breath. Furthermore, I knew now more than ever that even my bouts with faithlessness were an illusion. For even at my most atheistically prone, I was well aware that this, in and of itself, was proof of an undying, underlying faithfulness. For who or what was I to dictate or mandate what was fact and what was fiction, even for myself? For was not the imaginal realm within which everything, especially for the artiste, was infused with true life and enrichment? And if only the two realms of the fantastical and the practical could merge in harmonious dwelling within the world, who knows what humankind could achieve? For although a synthesis of this is enabled to occur on some level, the quixotic, notional, or extraneous matters always end up getting short shrift. And for those deemed idealists, dreamers, artistes, eccentrics, or romantics, how accommodation of a world of crude realism felt all the more taxing. Life for those of our kind often feels like more of an affliction, when in actuality what is truly needed is a salve to soothe those wounds inflicted by a continual abnegation of our more eclectic, exotic, and unorthodox leanings and pinings. Yet in my devout mindfulness, I knew that this world was nothing more than a diversionary detour to worlds much more ideal and captivating. Hence did I remain in a state of limbo between these two worlds, and was equally admired and resented for my ambivalence. But even with just 1 foot in and 1 foot out, I knew that I would still find enough asylum to enclave me until such time as it was to return once and for all to my celestial nativity. For I believe that we are all orphans of that lost paradise, as well as being the potentially prodigal progeny of that grand dragon, Satan. For there truly is no limbo, no middle ground, no merely alive or dead. We may dwell in an either-or kind of state, but must still pretend that we can dwell cohabitantly within both at the same time. For how can heaven house hell, and hell house heaven? Although here upon this earth in these current incarnations, this is very much the state of affairs. In nature, the lion never lies with the lamb, albeit in the form of dust and bone. Yet this comes down to mere condition, as the lamb wisely intuits for the sake of its own preservation to stay away from that lion's den. Yet with humankind, such instinct cannot always be obeyed, and the lions of this world stay well fed, whilst the lambs amongst us remain malnourished. And, as it so often is observed, that which makes the Homo sapiens advantageous over all other species, namely his perspicacity, is also the genesis of all of his woes and potential endangerments. But if only we could feel our Creator's sense of compassion, loss, and sorrow for us, would we know just how deeply we are cherished and loved. And even I was beginning to see this, for the fog had lifted, and I could feel so clearly that love which I had held so dearly, unbeknownst even to myself. And I could even see just what I had been depriving myself of and how foolish it had all been. And just yesterday, the mind had gritted its teeth and the heart's muffled screams had gone unheeded, drowned out as they were by the black mosaic of fear, easel as higher art within the sparse chambers of the esurient heart, obfuscating the masterfully crafted magnificence and beauty there beneath. It was joy spawned by the matrix of that higher love, now being bathed within its baptismal meditations, cleansing the architectural artifices of all egoistic fortressing, erected in such wasteful haste, leaving the mind and heart with no more need for illusory, compulsive assertions to all those things which had taught me how to hang on to the one branch, sure to only bow and bend, but eventually snap in two from the weight of such self-pitying, petty-wedded laments. Yes, the fog had lifted, and I could not only see more clearly now, but most significantly could I feel with more resonance and clarity. And from henceforth would I make the first real commitment I had ever made in my life. From henceforth would I choose justice. From henceforth would I choose just like any other day, but much differently. Yes, from this day onward, despite the epic battle I knew lay before me, would I choose to embrace love. For love had flooded the desiccated crevices of my crumbling heart and my blackened soul, saturating them with the super-encumbrant, almost unbearable levity of true, deep, and abiding joy, freedom, and life. And I felt so foolish when I realized again just how much I had missed having shut love out, and just how much it had missed me. And I felt as if all of those times I had lived without love had all been some grand illusion, crafted solely by myself and the demons I had let enter into myself. I felt almost as if those loveless times weren't real at all, as if they were just spurious, random projections to keep me preoccupied until love and true life had found me, or rather, I had found them again. I also had the revelation that this loveless world which I had wallowed in all of those years was not and had never been my true or rightful dwelling place. No, this time I really felt this truth. I believed in it just as it had never ceased believing in me. And this other, darker, colder world I knew did indeed still exist while I was here upon this earth in my current mortal human skin, but I had a strong sense this time that it would never ensconce me as it had once possessed the power to. They did indeed still coexist, these worlds apart, especially whenever I began to fall back into trying to appease them both. But by the grace of God, my weary soul had finally tired of this charade, this attempt to serve two such antithetical masters. For although my upbringing may have taught me to hold in highest regard the causes of chaos and opposition, and indeed these things do hold their Heraclitean honor and status within God's grand design, but now I was becoming a much more well-balanced human being. Now I was beginning to fully see the righteous purpose of order and morality. And I also began to understand more thoroughly how paradox and struggle were not there to merely inflict pain and to withhold all good things from us, but was there to teach us, and indeed, as the Eastern mystics would admonish, to evolve us. I now understood how the dance of creation and destruction cavort in celebratory diplomacy, more so than in anarchy. And from henceforth would I contend much more triumphantly with the bifurcate mind, and would I navigate with much more agility the labyrinthine, hazardous laboratory of life's great quantum experiment, and stay truer to testing the hypotheses of life's highest and noblest objectives, so that now, when I went forth into the world, would I rise and rise, continuing evermore to rise